Hi, everybody. My name's Jeannie Rosner. Welcome. So excited to host you all today. It's pretty fabulous. We have people for this salon webinar from all over the world, throughout the United States, in France, Spain, Mexico, Canada, Morocco, Algeria. Just fabulous. A little bit about me. I'm a retired pediatric anesthesiologist, and I started teaching and I now teach health and wellness with a focus on nutrition classes in our local middle and high schools. About 7 years ago, I started this platform, Soul Food Salon. Essentially, my mission is to educate and empower us all to be healthier. And the usual format is we do in-person events about once a month. And since the coronavirus has plagued us, I'm now doing these events virtually. This is actually our fourth virtual event. I have a website called soulfoodsalon.com, all one word. Everything that we've done in the last 7 years is up there. We have recipes, articles, all of our salon topics are presented there with PowerPoint presentations. You can go there and access all of our information. You can contact me also through the website, and you can also contact me through my email, Jeannie, Jeanne, at soulfoodsalon.com. I'm very active on social media, so you can follow along on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Everything is at Soul Food Salon. I only put out evidence-based science, and I smatter in a lot of health and wellness inspiration. Many of our past events have been videotaped, and they're up on my YouTube channel, again, at Soul Food Salon, and you can subscribe to that if you'd like. And today's event is being videotaped, and it's going to go to the Zoom cloud, and once I get it, I will upload it to YouTube and present it to you all. If you want to be on the email list to get that salon email, or the email, which is basically from we put out a health and wellness newsletter a few times a month called Soulful Insights, and that's my biggest database of email lists. So if you want to be on the email list for that, just contact me. But that is the email list that I will send out for this salon email, for this salon video. So just a little house cleaning before we get started. Essentially, the game plan for today will be David's going to speak for about 20 or so minutes, then Silken's going to present for 20 or so minutes, and then we're going to do a Q&A. And if we want you guys to be part of this, so the Q&A is for you guys to be part of the event. And if you hover at the bottom of your toolbar, the Zoom toolbar, there is a Q&A function. You can click on that and pose questions or comments throughout the event if you'd like. However, realize I will be asking David and Silken questions at the end of the event from questions that you guys pose in that comment box. So feel free to post questions, but I will not be presenting them until the end. I don't want to interrupt them throughout the presentation. So now it's my pleasure to introduce both of these amazing people. First off is David. So David is my husband's second cousin, so therefore my cousin. And I just struck the lottery being a family member with David, or having him as my family member. He's my friend, advisor, confidant, hiking buddy. He lives in New Hampshire. I live here in California, but when we get together, we get to do a lot of hiking together, which is awesome. He's quite impressive. He has a doctorate in both psychology and divinity, and he's an executive and organizational life coach. In fact, he's counseled many of my friends who've been kind of at inflection points in their life. He's really just wise, ton of wisdom, so non-judgmental, it's awesome. He's just a great person to have on your team, and so I'm really blessed to have him in my life, and I'm blessed to share him with you guys today. Silken as well is equally impressive. She's a 4-time Canadian Olympic athlete who persevered after a boating accident where she suffered significant injuries to her leg, where she was told that she probably would never row again. However, she triumphed and went on to win a bronze medal in the Barcelona Olympics just within 2 months of her accident. Silken has taken her life experiences and shares hers and others through her nonprofit organization called Unsinkable. Unsinkable's mission is to keep people invested in emotional and physical well-being despite their obstacles. Silken says we are all a collection of experiences and stories, and these stories have power to connect us. She will share some of her story today on resilience front and center. So I'm going to let David get started, and I'm going to sign off for now.
Hi, everybody, and greetings to you from New Hampshire. I'm completely delighted to be doing this with my good friend, Silken, and I think it's going to be a really lovely hour for you. So where do we begin today? I want to talk a little bit about my own personal life. When I was 16 years old and my father was 48, he died of a heart attack. We were playing tennis at the time when, without warning, he suffered a massive coronary and died in my arms. I remember many things about that day, but one memory that stands clear was after my mom showed up at the hospital and the doctor came out to pronounce him dead. She turned to me and said, "You're the man of the house now." I remember it as if it were yesterday and distinctly thinking, holy crap. I'm only 16 years old, for God's sakes. I am not ready for this. She was so traumatized, it was clear she couldn't handle telling my three younger siblings. And so without a driver's license and barely knowing how to drive, I took the family station wagon 15 miles back to our home, and on the front lawn with screaming and crying children and neighbors, broke the news to my 14 and 10-year-old sisters and 6-year-old brother. It was awful. At 64, that moment and the trauma it represented still stands as one of the most critical defining moments in my life. One that, for worse and yes, sometimes even better, has shaped who I am today. But here's the thing. I am not alone in my grief or struggle. Some had it better than me in their childhoods and some much, much worse. Same as it is today. It is what makes us human. What also makes us human is our capacity to rise above and to choose our response. This choice, whether conscious or not, has a word. It is resilience. It may feel like what we're going through has never happened before, and yet historically, we are not the first to experience global pandemics. The Antonine Plague, the Spanish flu of 1918, the bubonic plague, the cholera pandemic, AIDS, SARS, there are many. And now COVID-19. In each of these cases, we came back with resilience. The word resilience comes from Latin, resiliens, the root of which means to rebound, to jump, or to leap. Maybe the most interesting way of thinking about resilience is that its root can be found in the Latin phrase for starting point. This implies that our true character is measured not in anything we initially do, but in how we respond when we are tested. In all studies on resilience, researchers have found that resilient people share three things in common that non-resilient people do not. One, resilient people see the world as a meaningful place. Two, resilient people see themselves as having agency in that world. And three, resilient people see that successes and failures have been placed in their path to teach them something. Let's look a little bit more closely at these foundational ideas. First, the world is a meaningful place. Einstein said it well. There are only two ways to look at the universe, either as nothing is a miracle or everything is a miracle. I can't answer the larger theological question for you, but I can say if you want to build your resiliency muscle, then keeping your eye and mind open to the possibility of meaning in this time is step number one. When researchers and clinicians look at who copes well in crisis and even grows through it, it's not those who focus on pursuing happiness to feel better. It's those who cultivate instead an attitude of what is called tragic optimism. Tragic optimism is a phrase originated by Viktor Frankl, who wrote the landmark book Man's Search for Meaning about his experience in the Auschwitz concentration camp. It means the ability to maintain hope and find meaning in life despite its inescapable pain, loss, and suffering. He studied survivors and those that perished and found that the survivors shared one thing in common. They never obsessively focused on comfort or food or happiness or even survival. They endlessly looked for the meaning in whatever their day brought them, no matter what horror or unimaginable sadness. They kept asking these three questions. Where is the meaning in this? What am I to gain from this? How can I be my very best during the very worst? In our own country, after 9/11, studies of subjects who were more resilient found that they sought meaning in what had happened. This did not mean that they were Pollyannas. While perception is reality, reality is also reality. They fully understood the tragedy that we were all experiencing. They had the same levels of sadness and stress as less resilient people. We see them in the research over and over. Resilient people feel intensely negative reactions to trauma. They experience the darkest of emotions, including stress, despair, and fear. And yet, they stay present with the pain. They hold the experience. But, and this is critical, it is not where they stop, because then they actively seek hope and light, and this buoys them. When I was 42, I too almost died of a heart-related issue. I was in Lima, Peru, and about to fly to Cusco, a city at 15,000 feet above sea level, and hike into Machu Picchu. While in the National Museum, for some unknown reason at sea level, I suffered major angina. I collapsed and was flown back to the United States, where I underwent quintuple bypass surgery. I had 7 major blockages, 2 of them over 90%. I was literally a day away from dead and didn't know it. Research tells us that heart attack survivors who find meaning in the weeks and months following their crisis were 8 years later healthier and more likely to be alive than those who didn't. For me, personally, it's 22 years out and I haven't had any symptoms return. I look back on that time, which was the impetus to go and get a degree in divinity, write a one-man play about my experience, and most important, dramatically change my lifestyle as one of grace and deep meaning. Like my father's death, it profoundly shaped me for the better and who I am today. How did this happen? My secret during recovery, and opposite to many heart patients who can suffer deep depression after heart surgery, was not to ask, why did this happen to me? My secret was continually to ask, why did this happen for me? Holding an attitude of tragic optimism can bounce us forward, and we can grow not despite the pain, but because and through it. It's not the trauma that creates the growth, it's the response. Step 2 to building your resiliency muscle. Resilient people see themselves as having some agency in the world. In this regard, they consciously or unconsciously focus on what they can control. If I have an apple in my hand and I drop it, it falls and hits the ground. Why? It's not a trick question. Think what your answer would be. I have an apple, I drop it, and it falls and hits the ground. Why did the apple fall and hit the ground? Answer 1, gravity. Answer 2, I dropped it. Everything that will come to you today, tomorrow, and in your future will be in one of 2 categories. The things you can't control, gravity, and the things you can control, you dropped it. Resilient people naturally move away from the first and towards the second. They seek actions within their grasp and away from those things they ultimately have no agency. I love a practice of the Inuit peoples of the Arctic, a place I spent much time years ago. If you approached an Inuit elder and complained about something in your life, he or she would listen to you very carefully the first time. If you complained about the same thing, he or she would listen very carefully the second time. If you complained a third time, he or she would again listen very empathetically, maybe as if they were hearing it for the very first time. But if you complained about the same issue a fourth time, they would silently stand up, turn their back on you, and walk away. Because at that point, they believed you were more committed to your problem than you were to finding a creative solution. It was a reminder. Don't blame gravity. Instead, focus on your hands. Years ago, after the war in Bosnia, I worked with a remarkable woman named Saida Saric, who was the country director for a terrific organization called Women for Women International. One day, as she was giving me a tour of Sarajevo with powerful commentary like, "Here is where my cousin was shot by a sniper, and here is where a mortar fell and almost killed me," I asked, "Saida, what was the war like for you?" "Oh, David," she quietly said, "it was so hard. The fear, the starvation, the constant struggle, the death everywhere." Then she looked away, smiled a wicked smile and said, "But I do miss the parties." In the worst of the worst, Saida and her community decided to choose life. The final and third step to building resiliency is to welcome all that comes to your gate, good and bad, as being a teacher. This is what is meant by the Buddhist phrase, "The obstacle is the path." It is more than just dealing with struggle. It is welcoming it. I'm not saying we enjoy it. It sometimes can suck. I mean, right now, as my military friends would say, we are in the middle of the big suck. Maybe the biggest suck of our modern history. Finding the learnings can be painful and very hard, but it is the path. A helpful tool can be found in this story, a story so famous you will know the punchline as soon as I tell you. It has to do with a king who suffered mightily from a roller coaster of emotion. One day he'd be up and happy, enjoying the bounty of his life. The next he'd be down, sad at the overwhelm of it all. When he could take it no longer, he called for his wise man, i.e. his life coach, to help him manage his life. After listening carefully, his wise man reached into his pocket, pulled out a small but beautifully carved box of rare wood, inlaid with mother of pearl and rare and precious jewels. "Do not look at the outside," he said. "That is just wrapping paper. Inside the box is your answer." When the king opened the box, he found a simple gold ring, strangely simple because of the container that held it. But on that ring was carved the following phrase, a phrase every one of you knows, a phrase your grandmother probably taught you as a child, as did mine. On that ring was one short sentence: "This too shall pass." The secret to building the third step is to remember that no matter what, when things are awful, and yes, they have been and will continue to be awful for a while, maybe a long while, the trajectory of your life, no matter what, no matter how hard, no matter how tragic, no matter what struggles await, whatever it is, it too shall pass. In my work, I have heard the worst stories you could imagine: rape, death of a child, financial collapse, addictions of all sorts, cancer, deep suicidal depressions. But in almost all of those stories, what is true is that the people I have worked with got to the other side. It is the great mystery of the human mind that life's lessons are usually only learned in the rearview mirror and rarely through the front windshield. And yet, here we are, still. As a Buddhist friend of mine says, if you are alive, then no problem. If you are dead, then definitely no problem. But that is only half of the message, because this too shall pass is also a reminder that on your good days, when things look bright and you have hope and beauty in your day, cherish it. Say your gratitudes. Stop and watch a cloud pass. See the beauty and kindness that is available to you and probably there if you choose to look. Because it is the nature of life that this too is temporary. This too shall pass. We can make the bad days go faster and the good ones seem longer by remembering to wake every morning and to metaphorically put on our rings. And are reminding ourselves that the message of this too shall pass is only a choice away. I remember my mom when she was 85 and with Alzheimer's, telling me in a cogent moment that after my father died and left her alone with 4 small children and terrified, oftentimes she'd lie on the bed in a ball, just frozen. One day she got up, stared in the mirror and said to herself, "You can do this. You know how to do this. Your kids are depending on you. Now, do this." And she did, rising to spectacular levels of success in the state court system of Pennsylvania. This attitude is captured beautifully in a favorite poem of mine by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who wrote Women Who Run with the Wolves. It's called Refuse. Refuse to fall down. And if you cannot refuse to fall down, then refuse to stay down. And if you cannot refuse to stay down, then lift your heart to the heavens like a hungry beggar and ask that it be filled, and it will be filled. You can be pushed down. You can be kept from rising, but nobody can keep you from lifting your heart to the heavens except you. In the middle of misery, much becomes clear. Those who say no good will come from this are not yet listening. Emily Smith, who authored The Power of Meaning, says, life is, as Buddhists say, 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. As much as we might wish, none of us can avoid suffering. That's why it's important to learn to suffer well. Personally, I love the teaching from my own Jewish tradition. It says in the Talmud that each person should always carry 2 pieces of paper in his or her pocket. On one slip of paper, it should say, the universe was created just for me. On the other, it should say, I am nothing but dust and ash. The secret to life? Know when to read which piece of paper. Thank you. It is now my great pleasure to introduce you to my good friend, Silken Laumann, who is one of the most resilient people I know and has taken these principles and not just lived them at the highest level of success through her own life story, but today through her unsinkable foundation, authentically giving back to others while showing resiliency as the path for inspiration and the best of humanity. Silken, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, David. And David, whenever I listen to you, whenever I talk with you, I always come away just feeling full and feeling like I've been given a grain, a lot actually, of wisdom. And Jeannie, thank you for putting on these talks. I think it's especially now as there is so much struggle right now in the world and this unprecedented pandemic. Although I guess when we look at history, there have been, but it's certainly unprecedented in our lifetime. We need to hear from one another and we need to have hope. I happen to be right in this moment in the middle of some of the most, challenging professional projects of my life. And I just wanted to share that with you because I don't think anything in our life comes to us by accident. And right now, I am an Olympic athlete and a speaker and a writer, do all sorts of things, but Unsinkable is our big project right now, and it's a story sharing project. It brings together stories from people from all walks of life who have had courage, who've gone through really some of the toughest things we can expect in our life, and they share their stories of courage and how they got through. It's a great project, and I have decided because of COVID that one of the voices we're not hearing a lot about is the voices of our youth. And we're not necessarily, at least here in Canada, doing a great job of acknowledging and celebrating their losses. For us, we may be losing a few months of our working lives. Certainly we're all affected economically. Our economies, the worldwide economies are affected. There's a lot of fear out there, but our children, they're only gonna have one opportunity to have that grade 9 crush, they're only going to have that one opportunity to go to their high school graduation. My kids have come home from universities all over Canada and the United States, and they're really feeling those losses. And so I came up with this idea of let's put together a show to celebrate young people, to give them something to look forward to. Let's hear their voices, and let's hear the voices of the stars that they look up to. And I just want to be really clear. I did not know how to do this. I have no idea how to do this, but I went forward, and we are now pulling together. We've actually got a time slot on CTV television, yay. And it just kind of fed into this, because what I was thinking is nothing ever happens without an act of courage. You know, at some point, whenever we're starting anything, we have no guarantee of success. And I think back way, way, way back to when I started my Olympic journey. I had no idea when I decided I wanted to be an Olympic athlete that it would actually come true. And there was nobody handing me that perfect, you know, training program, that perfect path to an Olympic medal podium. It was a leap of faith. And today, you know, we have COVID, we have this challenge. And I think one of the things that we can start to think about is how this challenge is going to change us and how we're kind of going to grow from the experience. Because, you know, when you take a risk, when you have a leap of faith and you do something big, you do grow and change from that experience. And a lot of the time in life, you know, we might initiate those experiences. We did not initiate COVID, but here it is. And so what are we going to do about it? And it reminds me about the bravest animal in the world, the Dungeness crab. The Dungeness crab, in order to grow, in order to keep growing, it has to leave its shell and enter the ocean with a fragile new shell. That's courage. And in order for us to grow, in order for us to change, whatever our experience is, we have to be willing to take that first risk. And in my experience, I'm very lucky. I have had the company of so many amazing people, high achievers, business people, celebrities, like people who have been the very top of their field. And what I notice is that people who achieve extremely high levels in their chosen field are people who've gotten very comfortable with failing. The very first time that I rowed, the very first season that I rowed, I tipped my boat 21 times. And that actually is a world record. I've never met anybody who's tipped their boat 21 times. And you know, when I would tip that boat, I remember thinking, oh my God, I am so uncoordinated. I don't have what it takes. You know, maybe I just don't have what it takes to be an Olympic athlete. But as I became more resilient, as I grew that resiliency muscle, as David talked about, all that tipping the boat meant was that I tipped the boat. So it's not how much we fail, how often, how spectacularly we fail. It's what we've learned in the process, but also what we tell ourselves that failure means. If we tell ourselves that failure means we're not enough, we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we can't do it, it's going to take us a long time to try again. But if we tell ourselves that it just means literally what it means, I got dumped into the river, then we can move on and we can try again. My husband, who runs the largest fitness company in Canada, is one of the most, what's the word for it? He's certainly one of the most resilient people that I've ever met. And every time something happens, he doesn't even see it as a failure. He sees it as, okay, let's try it again, try it again. And the space between an attempt and a failure and another attempt is tiny. And so it's no surprise to me that he's as successful in business as he is. I think that during COVID, we need to learn even more than ever from our mistakes. And we have to look at this as an opportunity to be better, better as people, better as neighbors, better as a world community. Everything is slowing down for a moment in time. Our whole paradigm has shifted. And what can we take out of that? And what can we learn from? One of my most spectacular setbacks came when I was at the very peak of my career. In 1991, I became in rowing the world champion and the World Cup champion. I was the fastest single sculler in the world. And my goal for that 1992 season, where the Olympics were going to happen, the 92 Olympics were going to happen, my goal was to win an Olympic gold medal. But 10 weeks before the Olympic Games, at a race in Essen, Germany, I was hit by another rowing shell. Their rowing shell smashed into the side of my rowing shell, a German men's pair, and my rowing shell was wood. It shattered, driving 200 odd pieces of wood into my lower right leg. I was taken to a trauma center in Essen, Germany, and the doctors looked at my leg and they said, like, you've got torn muscle, you know, massive muscle damage and skin damage. You've got ligament damage, tendon damage. Your ankle is shattered. The Olympics are over. When the doctor said those words, it's like I couldn't grasp what he was saying. The Olympics are over, because I had dreamed about being an Olympic athlete from the time I was like 11 years old, and I'd watch Nadia Comaneci, you know, win 5 gold medals in Montreal, and I thought, oh, I'm going to be, you know, the next Nadia Comaneci. And really, that dream drove my life for a decade. And so when the doctor said to me, you're not going to the Olympics, I couldn't accept the doctor's words, and I asked for a TheraBand. I remember this like it was yesterday. And I tied that TheraBand to the end of my bed and I started pulling on it. And, you know, I had this huge open wound. I had screws through my foot and my leg, a cage over my ankle, and yet I was pulling on the TheraBands. I'm just checking here. I'm just going to make sure that you're all hearing me okay. Yeah. I just was getting a message on my screen that says click if you want to switch to a different microphone or speaker, but I think we're still good. So I'm pulling on this TheraBand, and this is obviously not ideal Olympic training 10 weeks before the Olympic Games, but it was something that I could do. And often in life, it's not about doing the ideal thing. It's not about doing the perfect thing. It's about doing what you can do in the moment that you're in. And I've really found that. I mean, I find this a lot in COVID. It's like, okay, the normal exercise equipment's not around. What can I do? Let's get creative. I'm finding that as we put this event together, I don't really know what I'm doing, but let's just do what we can do to the best of our abilities. And I think that what discourages us sometimes is that we have our dreams. We have the things that get us up in the morning and excite us and, you know, motivate us. And then we have the reality of where we are today. And sometimes the distance between where we are and the challenges that we have and where we're going is just so large. What lies between where we are today and where we're going, it's belief. You know, belief that somehow, some way, we're going to get there. I mean, how are we going to get through the huge blow our economy has taken and the losses that our children are experiencing and the deaths that some of us have experienced in our family and friends because of COVID? We get through by believing. We get through by knowing that no matter what's happening, we're going to get there. David had an elegant way of saying it. I probably have a less elegant way of saying it. And it's like, you know what, if you're in the middle of hell, for goodness sakes, keep going. Don't stay in the middle, just keep going. And I know in my life, a lot of the time, it's just about putting one foot in front of the other and believing that some way, somehow, we're going to achieve the things that we have set out to achieve. And so I spent 3 weeks in the hospital, 10 weeks before the Olympic Games. And after I got out of the hospital, I got back onto Elk Lake and then I went to Europe with the team. When I arrived in Europe, I was still using crutches to get around. And yet here I was in my head, believing that I would get to the Olympic Games now in 5 weeks' time. I got to the Olympic Games. And sitting in the starting gates, I was lined up for the final of the 1992 Olympic Games with the fastest single scullers in the world. And for the first 1,000 meters of a 2,000 meter race, I can tell you, I didn't even think about my leg. I just focused on the race. I just focused on what I could do. But at the 1,000-meter mark, which is a halfway mark, if some of you are rowers out there, I felt totally and utterly exhausted. I'd actually never felt so exhausted in a race before. And I thought to myself, I don't know if I can, I can't do this. And then I just, I don't know if you guys are in your running, you can make the analogy, but like I did 20 more strokes. I'm just going to do 20 more strokes. I had 20 more strokes, and I just kept counting 20 more strokes. And suddenly there's like 20 strokes to go. And the fastest sprinter in the world, who, I'm sorry, I've got to apologize here, happens to be an American. And, she passes me. And I thought, I am not coming in fourth. I have not worked this hard. I have not been through everything I've been through to come in fourth. And somehow, somewhere, I found a surge of energy. I crossed the finish line. I look up at the scoreboard. It read gold, Romania, silver, Belgium, bronze, Canada, Laumann, Silken. This is not what I imagined. I had imagined going to the Olympics and winning a gold medal. And yet that bronze medal, it's been such a touchstone in my life because it reminds me of how resilient we really are. And it reminds me how powerful our dreams are. It almost doesn't matter what the obstacles are going to be when our dreams are very clear, when we're very intent on what we want to achieve. And as David said, whatever the obstacle is, I'm sorry, I'm not hearing my pods here. Whatever the obstacle is, it almost doesn't matter because knowing that we're going to get through it, we're going to get pushed through it. And we can't control the outcome of our life. I totally agree. I mean, you can imagine it. I could have, imagined winning that bronze medal and coming fourth. But I would have been changed by the experience. I would have grown from the experience of going for it and giving my best effort. But I have a bronze medal. I have a bronze medal that I can touch and that I can hold, and that reminds me every single day about the power of our minds and the power of our hearts and our minds to choose our approach. I have this ongoing debate with my teenagers. I have 4 children, and my son particularly, who's 22, is like, Mom, you're so optimistic. Like, you just think the world's a good place. And, people can be so rude, Mom. And I look at him and I say, well, I know. I have lived 50 odd years here, and I know that the world is a tough place. And I know people have some really bad behavior, but I choose to see the good in the world. I choose to see what's possible versus what's not possible. In our Unsinkable platform, we have some amazing writers. We have people writing on our platform who've lost children and talk about their journey to heal and finding meaning in their life after a death by suicide. We've talked, we have stories of kids who've had drug addictions and who talk about how they got better and the things that made a difference in their life. And I want to finish today not by sharing my words, but by sharing the words of this remarkable young woman who writes for Unsinkable named Ashley Rose. And what she says is, whatever you're going through, someone would gladly change places with you. Ashley Rose was born HIV positive. Whatever you're going through, whatever the challenge is in your life, someone is always struggling more. And now today, it's a time to recognize that. For the first time in the history that I've been around, we actually know what we're thinking. I know what you're thinking. You know what I'm thinking. We're all struggling with the same things. And so I say the best thing we can do is we can acknowledge and care about one another. Recognize that whatever it is we're struggling with, we can get through it. And if we've got extra bandwidth, if we have extra emotional resiliency and positivity, to share it with others. Over to you guys.
That was amazing, both of you. Both of you, I mean, just spectacular. I appreciate you both sharing your vulnerabilities with us, your insights, your positivity, your realism, your stories. Thank you. I thank you from all of us. I know David's going to share a poem that he enjoys. And then before we go into the question and answer from the audience, I thought it would be fun if David and Silken pose a question to each other. So I'm going to let David share his poem first.
So this poem is one that it builds on, I think, Silken's point of view, which is you just got to start, just take a step and then a step and keep choosing life. So it's a poem that after my heart surgery 22 years ago, I began saying as essentially my daily prayer. And it's by a 13th century mystic poet from the Sufi tradition named Jalaluddin Rumi. It goes like this. The soft breezes of dawn have secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you truly want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the great door sill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep. So today, around the question of resiliency, where both Silken and I have been talking about essentially in one way or another, not going back to sleep, no matter what circumstance or the issues. So my question for you, Silken, and by the way, you could see why I was just so thrilled to do this with her, such a living vision of resiliency. So you were a single scholar in what was arguably like one of the toughest most challenging, difficult, painful athletic endeavors as a sports person as you could imagine. Everybody I know who has rowed in their life at a collegiate level or an AAU level says it is the most painful thing they've ever gone through. So my question for you, with great respect and humility, is what is one thing that you've learned as a world-class athlete that for people like me who are non-athletes in that world, you would say from the athletic world, take this one thing and try this or do this. This is what makes the difference between a world-class athlete and the rest of you in order to be different.
Oh, that's a hard question. You know, I can only speak in first person my own experience, and I think for me, why I was as good as I was, you know, obviously you have to have the physical disposition. You have to have a certain height and a certain weight to even be in the league. But after that, there's always going to be people who are stronger and fitter than you. But I think I had a willingness to do what others were not willing to do. Had a willingness to work longer hours, to break myself down technically, and be coachable too. I think many of us get very locked in and attached to the things that always worked for us, and we hold on to them. Like, it's like, this has always worked for me, I'm not letting it go. And I think my coachability, my ability to listen, to suspend my own judgment and listen to a coach was incredibly important. So that willingness to go farther and further than other people. And just to speak really quickly about the physical pain, it is such a painful sport. I'm so glad I'm not doing it anymore. But it also kind of gives you, it gives you a familiarity with pain, and not just physical pain, psychic pain, endurance, the pain of not knowing, the pain of, you know, putting yourself in the starting gates of an Olympic final when you know you can screw up, and, you know, finding that courage despite the pain. So the familiarity with pain has really helped me in life. And even with what I'm going through right now with putting this show on, I mean, it's like, okay, I don't love this feeling, but here it is.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let me bounce it back to you, David. One of the things that I really love about you is your confidence. And you're very, you know, you're very confident in your words and, you know and what you don't know. And I've actually, in my life, really struggled with confidence at various points. So I wondered, for you in your life, first of all, if you have struggled at times with your confidence, and when you're not 100% feeling like a rock star, what is it that you tell yourself or you do?
Well, the first question is really easy. Like many people, I struggle with it all the time, to be perfectly honest. Not all the time, but I do struggle with it, of course, like most folks. And it has been a journey, I think, and part of it is just in the presentation. And part of it is in slowing myself down. And part of it is really about building sufficiency. And part of it is studying. You know, like you were an athlete, you were willing to study yourself and break yourself down. For me, I would also study and learn and apply and relearn and apply, and constantly believed in the idea that the two most magical words in the English language, as a teacher once told me, were next time, and always be iterating and iterating and iterating. And then, quite frankly, it's a joy that you get, and it's one of the benefits of being 64. Is you've seen things come around many times, and my confidence, I know that I've done it before, and I think that's part of it. And when I do feel a lack of confidence today about anything that could be coming up, I just spend some time thinking about what is it that I know, and what are the gifts and talents that I can bring forward, and not focus on what I don't know and what it is that I still don't feel that I have a strong skill set in. And that also helps to ground me in my perspective. And then, of course, I have a Jack Russell Terrier that loves me no matter what. And I can always go back to her and my wife, who will also treat me the same way.
Great, thank you.
All right, I'm going to throw out a couple questions to you guys that came from the audience and whatnot. All right, this is for either of you guys. When I catch myself starting to complain, what are some things I can do to pause and stay present?
Silken?
I think just what you actually said in the question was to pause, right? It's because sometimes it's like an automatic response. We just complain, and then we don't even realize we're doing it. It's just like stop, and then bring yourself into the moment. So like when I was an athlete and I get super nervous, before an event, what I would do is I would be holding my teacup, and I'd be like, I'm holding my teacup, I'm sipping the water, and I'd just be like forcing myself into that moment. And that's what I would do if I found when I do it now, when I find myself starting on a negative track, and it's like I just stop, and then I get in the moment. I have sometimes days where I'm like, oh man, I look like crap today. And I just don't look in the mirror that day, because I know I'm going to say something negative. So why look in the mirror if you're going to say something negative? So catch yourself. And the more awareness you build around it, it actually will just start to change, because you've asked yourself that question. Oh, I'm going to pay attention to when I complain.
Do either of you recommend, like, kind of what strategies would you recommend for being in the moment? Would it be formal meditation, walking meditation? Are there any particular strategies that work best for you all that you can share?
Well, I'll just continue for a second. I'll just say that developing what we call a practice is the single most powerful thing you will ever do in your life. And when you first start, whether it's yoga, whether it's meditation, whether it's walking meditation, whether it's breath work, whether it's chanting, those are all meditative practices. David has a lot more experience than I do, but I have been practicing yoga for 19 years. And I've been meditating almost as long on and off. I'm not as good a meditator as I am, of course, the physical, it always comes back to the physical. But building these kind of practices into your life day after day, year after year, profoundly change you. It just does. And there's so much science behind it, and David will give a lot more of the theory. All I can say is, in my life, a high-strung, type A, totally driven individual, these Buddhist practices, these Sanskrit language, all this stuff, there's so much to it. So just do it. Just start. You got to start somewhere. Start tomorrow by meditating for 5 minutes.
I completely agree with all of that. And the only thing that I would add is, and what I really liked about what you said, Silken, is the secret is you've got to interrupt. There's got to be an interruption process. And so many of us, we connect or it's over what something is called negative bonding. So what we do is we connect with people over what's not working. We connect with people through complaint. So it isn't just that we have to interrupt ourselves, but oftentimes we have to interrupt others, like that story that I told about the Inuit elders. Inuit are oftentimes were referred to historically among non-native peoples as Eskimos, but they're the people of the Arctic. And they would be very aware, an elder would be very aware of when they were getting into negative bonding with someone, supporting them in that process. And it's important to sort of know why we do that, why we have that behavior. It gives us something. And what it gives us is it gives us when we complain. The root of complaining is it makes us feel as if we're victims of our circumstance. That's a big word to use in this circuit, but it makes us feel like we're victims of what we are dealing with. And the benefit to being or feeling like a victim is that it makes us feel innocent, like somehow we have no responsibility or we can't do anything over what we're given. I'm a coach and have worked with a number of people over many, many years. But I also work with a coach. And I remember one of the more powerful things that one time happened, it was very humbling to me, is I work with him over Skype. He's a wonderful man, and he asked me to do something. And I said to him, I said, what, over Skype? And he looked very calm and he said, well, if you want to make Skype the issue. It's like, oh. And so the secret, I think, is to really look for places where we can take action and to know that when we complain, it makes us feel like victims of our circumstance. But it really, when we are victims and we are innocent of our circumstance, we lose all control. The only place where we can control our world is when we're willing to take it back with responsibility, is we take it back by seeking places of action. So one, interrupt the process. Find some way to interrupt it, track it, as Silken said. Two, understand that really it's based in some victimology somewhere along the line. And that's with a small v, not a large v. And three, look for a place where you can take positive action.
So in that vein though, right now, everything is so unknown. I mean, and so many things are out of our control. Would you recommend grasping what we can control and how we behave, and that we should wear a mask when we go out and not worry about the others? I mean, how should we navigate this? Like, what would you recommend for all of us during this unknown time?
Yeah, I would say during this unknown time, learn what you can, listen as much as you can, and I would say look for opportunities every day where you can take some measure of control. I live for instance, in a small town, and there's a large box store that is down the road. And I went in, about 2 weeks ago into the box store, and nobody in the box store was wearing a mask or gloves. And I don't mean the people who were the customers. I mean the people who were working there. And I asked to speak to the manager. He came out and he wasn't wearing anything. Maybe it was 3 weeks ago. I could have gone back, I could have complained, I could have made a big fuss about it to anybody who would listen in my general group. But instead, I got online, I found out who the CEO was, I wrote him a note. I said, this is really important to me. I need you to understand this is what's going on. Within 30 minutes, I had a call back from the COO, a note back. And they very quickly changed their policies and started doing things differently. I felt good about that because I was able to make a difference in my community by taking action. So figure out what you believe, figure out what's important to you, and then look for places where you can take action based upon what your personal values are.
Okay. Again, I'm taking some questions from the audience here. David, you mentioned Buddhism a couple of times during your talk. Have you found a connection between those who practice Buddhism and resiliency?
No, I probably use those because just I love the quotes. But I think there's lots of, across lots of traditions. But as Silken said, and I cannot agree with this more, is what there is there is a connection between presence and resiliency. And Buddhism as a tradition is very heavily presence-based because it's based in practices of meditation, but that could also be said of other religious traditions and other traditions elsewhere. So there is a connection, I think, not just with Buddhism, but there is a connection between presence and resilience.
Okay. All right. This is probably many people in the audience are feeling this, at least those that have a lot of kids, you know, perhaps at home. I find myself needing to be the constant cheerleader in my home and continually talking about resiliency and how we have it better than most people, which we do. But my adult children are starting to feel the stress of this time, the furloughs, the no jobs, the uncertainty of whether their job opportunities will be available. And it's getting more and more difficult to be quite so upbeat. Do you have any daily suggestions for many of us?
So I'm gonna answer that because we've actually been taping kids across the country right now and hearing what they're feeling. And I think it's really important to hear them. It's so easy as adults, like we're just, yeah, let's get to the positive side of it, but you can't get to the positive side of it without first acknowledging that you're in what is truly a loss for these young people. And I have a 19-year-old, I have a 22-year-old. They're very concerned. I mean, my daughter's in third year at Harvard. She lost half of her year this year. She's probably not going back to the real Harvard experience again next year. You know, these aren't just, you know, theoretical losses. They're not even financial losses at this point. They're losses of experiences they'll never get back, right? And so I think we have to listen to them. We can't move on without hearing to, oh, let's be positive about this, because you have to give the grief space. So I think that what I've noticed with my kids is that if I listen to them, if I hear their sadness, if I spend some time with their sadness and I simply just listen, that actually does more than talking to them about resilience and that we're so lucky and we're so lucky. It's like, well, they don't feel lucky right now. They feel sad. They don't have their sports and they missed their final season of rowing, or, you know, they were high school students and they were favored to win the gold medal and now they're not going to. And for them in their lives, for how much they've experienced, these are huge events. So I would say that too. And the other thing that I would say, and I see it so much in my life, is that contributing to others at this time is so essential to our sense of happiness, of meaning, of connectiveness. So if you can get involved with your kids on doing something on your street, I'm sure there's an old lady or an old man that lives in your street who should not be going out for groceries, right? Why not get your kids to do the grocery run if they're old enough to drive? So I think that contribution and that giving is also is actually an extremely powerful tool to keep a positive and good sense of well-being through this time.
Can't add anything to that. It's brilliant.
Yeah, those are good suggestions. All right, Silken, here's a question for you. Do you have any tips on turning something we are passionate about into something real and tangible, like you did with the program for the Canadian youth? Is it just go for it?
Go for it. Well, you know, I mean, this is apparently what retired anesthesiologists do.
Perhaps.
You know, so you know, I think at least in my life, I've always thought, oh, other people know better, and it's just, you know, a little bit my mindset is like, I don't know what I'm doing, and like I actually don't a lot of time, and I take some pretty big risks and put myself out there, but I just think it's the only way of doing it. Maybe like when you're first starting to think about doing something, you could volunteer with a project that maybe does something similar, and then you can go on that learning curve without it costing you, you know, your savings in the bank or your reputation or any of those things. So whenever you can do learning for free without the stakes being super high, it's a good idea. But at some point, you know, the rubber just hits the road and you just got to go for it. And like I said, all through my speech, you know, don't be afraid to fail, because you will. And, you know, you'll learn along the way. And this is my third major initiative, not-for-profit initiative I've done in my lifetime. My first one failed pretty badly. My second one was pretty good. And this one I think is going to be great.
Awesome.
Could I would just add one thing, because I love that. I have always used the expression "live in the leap," and sometimes you just have to, as Silken said, you just have to go for it. And what I have found and what I've advised other people is that it isn't actually to say yes to something, to commit to doing something, to take a courageous action. It usually, it doesn't have to be like an hours or days or weeks or month process. You can start it within 10 seconds. It just takes 10 seconds of courage, 10 seconds to say, well, I've never done this before, but yeah, we'll do a salon, or I've never done a nonprofit, but I think that would be a good place to start. And then you'll figure it out. Then you'll kind of live into the leap of what it is. But it's getting that first thing out there. And that oftentimes is very short. And, you know, as we all know, most great things don't start with no, they start with yes. And then people figure them out. So I would say, try it and see what happens.
Great. Okay. All right. There's another question. I imagine that you would say that some people could benefit from having a coach to find the resilience you're talking about. When does a coach become a crutch, would you say? And when would these self-examinations become egocentric?
Oh.
Powerful question.
Is that for me or for Silken?
Well, I can answer it as a non-coach. Okay, so that maybe it's you can get both sides of it. So if you think about like the most vibrant, exciting people, the people that you look at their life and you think, wow, they've really got their stuff together, and I really like their company. When I'm in their company, I feel supported, I feel uplifted. I would put money on the fact that those people have done some serious self-exploration, and that they have gone beneath the surface. They've shed some layers of their ego, and that only comes through doing personal work. And the thing is, you can do personal work by yourself, but it's kind of like not having a rowing coach. Your life's probably not long enough to learn the stuff that you really need to learn. So what's great now today is that there's so many resources available. There's so many things you can download. There's so many ways of learning, that we have access more than ever to coaching without, necessarily, if we don't have the resources, to hire, a coach. But I just say coaches, counseling, all that kind of stuff, it just accelerates your learning process. And could it get to the point of navel gazing? I suppose so, but there would be a lot of ego involved if the process was navel gazing. And I think that really, as you start to unpeel the layers, you move beyond ego and into the essence of who you really are, and hopefully move less and less and further away from our egos.
So I think that is a really interesting and a really interesting question. So my answers would be this: if we took out the word coach and we just put in the word a wise person or someone with wisdom, I would say it's always valuable to try and have someone in your life, no matter how old you are, who is further along the journey than you and wherever you're trying to go, whether that you're a carpenter or you're a doctor or you're in marketing or you're a psychologist or, whatever it is. If you're fish, it's always good to have someone further ahead than you who is willing to bring their wisdom to you and willing to tell you when you're doing things well and also when you're not doing well. When it becomes a crutch and I think it's a really interesting question, because there are people who can go to, you could just see them, they go to tons of workshops and do tons of things about self-growth, but they don't actually move forward. And so the question that would come up for me, if I was working with a client, or that someone should be actually asking themselves is, where are their breakthroughs? Where is their forward movement? Where am I doing things that I can see that I am different now than I was before? If you can't see that or feel it, or more importantly, if others can't see it or feel it, then it is likely you're using it as a crutch, or it's becoming navel gazing, and it is not, you know, anybody who works with anyone who is, if you're taking on a mentor, whether it's paid or not, or a student, whether it's paid or not, it's all about them taking whatever the learnings are and putting them into action and change. And if you don't feel that experience, or other people don't feel or experience it, then it is just navel gazing. And then you're using the process not for forward movement in relationships or your life or your health or whatever it is. Then what you're doing is essentially you're using it as a way to deflect from the real issues of your life.
Okay. All right. Maybe we'll end with this one last question. All right. Kind of what first resource would you go to, or to suggest a person read to help them get on the right track right now, to being more positive and into more resiliency, into a more resilient state? Is there one like go to?
Yeah, I got a great one. Unsinkable. I'd buy the book Unsinkable by Silken Laumann.
I just got mine in the mail.
Thank you. Yes.
Yesterday. Unfortunately, I will start reading it when we are finished.
Really good.
Well, thank you.
So your website, do you want to share a little bit about your website?
Yeah, thank you. What always helps, especially because we're in the first year of building our organization, is if you follow us, if you comment on our stories and just get involved. Our website's weareunsinkable.com, pretty easy to remember. Unsinkable rower, you know, that's a pretty easy one. We're on all social channels, as are you, under Unsinkable. On Facebook, we are Unsinkable, but everything else is Unsinkable. And again, like it's just very helpful for us as we build our charity, and you know, to have more followers and people more engaged, because then we're learning from everybody as we go along.
Great. All right. This has been fabulous. I will, as soon as we're done, get the recording, and I will try to do some magic and upload it to YouTube, and hopefully will be available within a day or so on my YouTube channel at Soul Food Salon. And if you want to get on the email list, you can go on my website, soulfoodsalon.com. And I think on the top, there's subscribe to the Soulful Insights, which is our health and wellness newsletter, or you could email me, Jeannie@soulfoodsalon.com, and I will put you on the list. And if you're not on the list, just check out YouTube within the next day or so, and you can share this with others. And David and Silken, this has been fabulous. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for showing up.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.